The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage, casting gentle shadows across the breakfast table where Carole Middleton sat with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Her usually bright eyes were rimmed with worry lines that seemed to have appeared overnight, and her normally perfect posture had given way to a slight slump that spoke of sleepless nights and endless anxiety. It had been 3 days since the surgery, 3 days since her world had been turned upside down with a single phone call that no mother ever wants to receive. The voice on the other end had been calm, professional, but the words had hit her like a physical blow. Catherine needed emergency surgery. Complications had arisen. The situation was serious but under control. Please don't panic. Don't panic. How could she not panic when her eldest daughter, her precious Catherine, was lying in a hospital bed, vulnerable and in pain? The same Catherine who had always been the strong one, the responsible one, the daughter who had grown from a determined little girl into a woman of grace and resilience that had captured the heart of a nation. Carole remembered the last conversation she had with Catherine before everything changed. They had been planning the Easter holidays, discussing which recipes to try for the family gathering, laughing about how the children were growing so fast. Catherine had sounded tired but happy, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that had always been her trademark. There had been no indication that within hours, their lives would be thrown into chaos. The drive to the hospital felt endless, even though Michael sat beside her, his steady presence usually so comforting but, today feeling insufficient against the storm of emotions raging inside her chest. The London streets blurred past the window as her mind raced through 1,000 different scenarios, each one more frightening than the last. She found herself gripping the door handle so tightly that her knuckles had turned white, her breathing shallow and rapid despite her attempts to stay calm. "She's going to be fine," Michael said quietly, reaching over to place his hand over hers. His voice was steady, but she could hear the underlying tension that he was trying so hard to hide. They had always been a team, supporting each other through every challenge life had thrown their way, but this felt different. This was their child lying in that hospital bed, and no amount of success in business or life experience could prepare them for this moment. Carole nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she spoke. She had built a reputation as a woman who could handle anything, who had raised 3 successful children while building a thriving business empire. She was known for her poise, her ability to remain graceful under pressure, her skill at bringing families together and creating moments of joy and celebration. But all of that felt meaningless now, stripped away by the fundamental fear that every parent carries deep in their heart. The hospital loomed ahead of them, its imposing brick facade and countless windows making it look more like a fortress than a place of healing. Carole had never liked hospitals, had always associated them with loss and sadness, with moments when life changed forever and families were never quite the same again. The antiseptic smell that greeted them as they walked through the main entrance immediately transported her back to other difficult times, other vigils by hospital beds, other moments when hope and fear battled for dominance in her heart. The security arrangements were discreet but obvious, men in dark suits positioned strategically throughout the corridors, their presence a reminder of just how different Catherine's life had become since marrying into the royal family. Carole sometimes forgot about the constant scrutiny, the way every aspect of her daughter's life was analyzed and discussed by strangers, the weight of responsibility that Catherine carried with such apparent ease. But, here, in this sterile environment, it felt overwhelming. They were escorted through a maze of corridors, past rooms filled with other families dealing with their own crises, their own fears and hopes. Carole found herself wondering about their stories, these strangers whose lives had been touched by illness or accident, who were living through their own versions of the nightmare that had brought her here. It was a reminder that suffering was universal, that no amount of privilege or status could shield someone from the fundamental vulnerabilities of human existence. The waiting area outside Catherine's room was small and simply furnished, designed more for function than comfort. William was already there, standing by the window with his back to them, his shoulders tense with the weight of worry and responsibility. When he turned around, Carole was struck by how much older he looked, how the carefree young man who had courted her daughter had been replaced by someone who understood the weight of duty and the fear of loss. "How is she?" The words tumbled out before Carole could stop them, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying all the desperation she had been trying so hard to contain. William's smile was gentle but strained, the expression of someone trying to be strong for others while dealing with his own overwhelming emotions. "She's sleeping now. The surgery went well, better than they initially expected, but she's still very weak. The doctors say the next few days will be crucial for her recovery." Carole felt her knees go weak with relief, but it was quickly followed by a new wave of anxiety. The next few days. Crucial for recovery. The clinical language couldn't hide the fact that they weren't out of the woods yet, that there were still challenges ahead, still reasons to worry and hope in equal measure.
Can I see her?
The question came out more as a plea than a request, and she hated how vulnerable she sounded, how desperate. But this was her daughter, her firstborn, the baby she had held in her arms 39 years ago and promised to protect and love forever. William nodded, but his expression grew more serious.
The doctors want to prepare you. She doesn't look like herself right now.
The surgery was extensive, and she's connected to various monitors and machines.
It might be overwhelming at first.
Nothing could have prepared Carole for what she saw when she finally entered Catherine's room. Her vibrant, strong daughter looked so small and fragile in the hospital bed, her usually glowing skin pale and drawn, her beautiful hair spread across the pillow in a way that made her look younger and more vulnerable than Carole had seen her in years. The steady beeping of monitors filled the silence, a constant reminder of how precarious the situation still was. Catherine's eyes were closed, her breathing steady but shallow, and, for a moment Carole was transported back in time to when Catherine was a little girl, sick with flu and looking to her mother for comfort and healing. The maternal instinct that had driven every decision Carole had made for nearly 4 decades surged through her with overwhelming force. She approached the bed slowly, afraid to disturb the peace that seemed to surround her sleeping daughter, afraid to acknowledge the reality of tubes and wires that connected Catherine to the machines, keeping careful track of every vital sign. This wasn't how she had imagined spending this week, wasn't part of any plan they had made for the future.
She woke up about an hour ago, William said quietly from behind her. She asked about the children, wanted to know if they were okay. That's Catherine, isn't it? Even when she's the one in the hospital bed, she's worried about everyone else.
Carole smiled through the tears that had started to gather in her eyes.
Yes, that was exactly like Catherine.
Always thinking of others, always putting her family's needs before her own, always carrying more responsibility than any one person should have to bear. It was one of the qualities that had made her such a wonderful daughter and such a natural fit for the role she had taken on, but it was also something that worried Carole sometimes. She reached out tentatively and took Catherine's hand in hers, surprised by how cold it felt, how fragile the fingers seemed compared to the strong, capable hands she was used to. Catherine had always had beautiful hands, perfect for the endless handshaking and ribbon-cutting and gentle touches that her role required, but now they looked delicate and vulnerable. "I'm here, darling," she whispered, not sure if Catherine could hear her but needing to say the words anyway.
"Mummy's here, and everything's going to be all right."
The afternoon stretched endlessly as Carole maintained her vigil by Catherine's bedside, watching the slow rise and fall of her daughter's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of the monitors, and trying to process the events that had brought them to this point. Michael came and went, bringing tea and sandwiches that no one felt like eating, making quiet phone calls to keep the rest of the family updated, handling all the practical details that needed attention. James and Pippa arrived in the early evening, their faces reflecting the same mixture of worry and determination that Carole felt in her own heart. The siblings had always been close, bound together by shared experiences and the unique challenges of growing up in the public eye after Catherine's marriage. Seeing them together, supporting each other through this crisis, reminded Carole of all the family dinners and holidays and celebrations they had shared, all the moments of joy that made times like this so much more difficult to bear.
"Any change?"
Pippa asked quietly, taking a seat on the opposite side of Catherine's bed and reaching for her sister's other hand.
Carole shook her head, not trusting her voice to remain steady.
There had been small signs of improvement throughout the day, slight changes in heart rate or breathing pattern that the nurses assured them were positive developments, but Catherine remained deeply asleep, her body focused entirely on the enormous task of healing. As the sun began to set outside the hospital window, casting long shadows across the room, Carole found herself thinking about all the times she had sat beside sickbeds over the years. The children's illnesses when they were young, her own mother's final days, the various health scares that every family faces over time. But none of those experiences had prepared her for this, for the particular agony of watching your adult child fight for recovery, for the helpless feeling of being unable to fix the problem through sheer force of love and determination. The evening shift of nurses brought a gentle efficiency that helped ease some of the tension in the room. They explained each procedure, each medication, each small adjustment to Catherine's care with patience and kindness that spoke of years of experience with worried families. Carole found herself grateful for their expertise, for the way they treated Catherine with such gentle respect, for their understanding of how frightening this all was for those who loved her. "She's doing very well," the head nurse assured them during her evening rounds. "Her vital signs have been stable all day, and we're seeing good signs of healing."
The next 24 hours will tell us a lot more, but there's every reason to be optimistic. Optimistic. Carole clung to that word as the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, as the corridors grew quieter and the lighting dimmed to allow for rest and recovery. She had always been an optimistic person by nature, someone who looked for the silver lining in every cloud, who believed that good things happened to good people and that love could overcome any obstacle. But, sitting in that hospital room, watching her daughter fight for recovery, optimism felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she found herself making bargains with whatever higher power might be listening, promising anything and everything if Catherine could just be okay, if they could just get through this crisis and return to the normal chaos of family life. The first night was the longest of Carole's life. Despite the comfortable chair the hospital had provided and William's gentle insistence that she try to get some rest, sleep remained elusive. Every change in the monitor's rhythm, every slight movement from Catherine, every footstep in the corridor outside brought her instantly alert, heart racing with hope or fear depending on the circumstances. Around 3 a.m, Catherine stirred for the first time since Carole had arrived. It was just a slight movement, a flutter of eyelids and a small adjustment of position, but it sent Carole's heart racing with hope. She leaned forward in her chair, reaching for Catherine's hand and whispering words of encouragement and love. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe. You're going to be fine." Catherine's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first but gradually clearing as she took in her surroundings. When her gaze finally settled on her mother's face, the smallest smile crossed her lips, and Carole felt as though the sun had just risen after the darkest night of her life. "Mom," Catherine whispered, her voice hoarse and weak but unmistakably her own. "You came." "Of course I came," Carole replied, tears streaming down her face as she squeezed Catherine's hand gently. "I'll always come. I'll always be here when you need me." It was a promise she had made 39 years ago when she first held her newborn daughter, and it was a promise she would keep for the rest of her life, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The second day brought a mixture of relief and new worries that Carole hadn't anticipated. Catherine was awake more frequently now, able to hold brief conversations and even manage small smiles when the children's drawings arrived via William's careful coordination with their nannies. But, with consciousness came pain, and watching her daughter struggle with discomfort that no amount of maternal love could ease was almost harder than the previous day's uncertainty. Carole had never felt so helpless in her life. She was a woman who prided herself on being able to solve problems, whether it was orchestrating the perfect family celebration, managing the complex logistics of her business, or simply knowing exactly what to say when one of her children was struggling. But, here, in this sterile room surrounded by medical equipment she didn't understand, all her usual skills felt inadequate. "Tell me about the children," Catherine whispered during one of her more alert moments, her eyes lighting up with the maternal concern that had never left her, even in her weakened state. "Are they asking questions? Are they worried?" William, who had barely left the hospital since the surgery, leaned forward from his position by the window. He looked exhausted, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the stress and sleepless nights they had all endured. "They think you have a tummy bug and need extra rest. George wanted to send you his favorite stuffed elephant to help you feel better, and Charlotte drew you a picture of flowers because she says they make everything beautiful." Catherine's smile was radiant despite her obvious fatigue. "And Louis?" "Louis is convinced that if he's very good and eats all his vegetables, it will make you better faster," William replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Maria is keeping them busy with extra activities, and your parents have been wonderful about maintaining their routine." Carole watched this exchange with a heart full of pride and sorrow. Even facing her own health crisis, Catherine's first thoughts were for her children, for making sure they felt safe and loved despite the disruption to their world. It was so typical of the woman she had raised, the daughter who had somehow managed to balance being a devoted mother with the enormous responsibilities of her public role. The morning brought a parade of medical professionals, each with their own specialties and their own assessments of Catherine's progress. Carole found herself hanging on every word, trying to decode the medical terminology and reading hope or concern into every slight change in tone or expression. The lead surgeon, a distinguished woman in her 50s who radiated competence and calm, spent extra time explaining Catherine's condition and the expected timeline for recovery. "The surgery was more complex than we initially anticipated," she explained, her tone honest but reassuring. "We discovered some complications that required additional intervention, but we were able to address everything successfully. The next few days will be crucial for monitoring her body's response to the procedure and ensuring there are no secondary issues." Secondary issues. More complications. Additional monitoring. The clinical language couldn't disguise the fact that they still weren't out of danger, that there were still variables beyond anyone's control. Carole found herself gripping the arms of her chair, fighting the urge to demand guarantees that no doctor could provide. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "What should we be watching for? What are the risks?" The surgeon's expression was kind but serious. "Any major surgery carries risks of infection, bleeding, or adverse reactions to anesthesia. In Catherine's case, we're also monitoring for signs of inflammation or other complications specific to the type of procedure she underwent. But I want to emphasize that she's responding very well so far. Her vital signs are stable, and she's showing good signs of healing." After the medical team left, the room fell into a quiet that felt both peaceful and heavy with unspoken fears. Catherine dozed fitfully, her body still fighting the effects of anesthesia and pain medication, while Carole maintained her vigilant watch from the bedside chair that had become her world for the past 48 hours. Pippa arrived mid-morning with fresh clothes for everyone and news from the outside world that felt both comforting and surreal. Life was continuing beyond the walls of this hospital room. People were going about their daily routines, the spring weather was beautiful, and the cherry blossoms in Buckingham Palace gardens were reaching their peak bloom. It seemed impossible that such normal, lovely things could be happening while they were trapped in this bubble of worry and medical terminology. "The children's school has been very understanding," Pippa reported quietly, settling into the chair beside Carole with the easy familiarity of someone who had spent countless hours in similar vigils over the years. "They've arranged for extra support and counseling if needed, though James says the little ones seem to be handling everything remarkably well." Carole nodded, grateful for the practical arrangements that others were handling while she focused entirely on Catherine's recovery. The network of support that surrounded their family in times of crisis was something she had always treasured, the way brothers and sisters and extended family and trusted friends stepped in to ensure that life could continue even when the center of their world felt unstable. "I keep thinking about when she was little," Carole found herself saying, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Do you remember when she broke her arm falling from that tree in the garden? She was about 7, I think, and she was so brave at the hospital. She kept telling the nurses jokes to make them laugh, even though I could see how scared she was." Pippa smiled at the memory. "She's always been like that. Taking care of everyone else even when she's the one who needs help. Remember when she insisted on planning my birthday party even though she had pneumonia? She ran the whole thing from her bed, directing everyone and making sure every detail was perfect." The stories flowed between them then, a gentle stream of memories that helped fill the sterile room with warmth and life. Catherine's first day of school, her determination to learn to ride a horse, her teenage years when she threw herself into sports and academics with equal passion, her university days when she blossomed into the confident young woman who would eventually capture Prince William's heart. Each memory was a reminder of Catherine's strength, her resilience, her ability to face challenges with grace and determination. But it was also a reminder of how much they all had to lose, how central Catherine was to the fabric of their family's life, how unimaginable it would be to navigate the future without her steady presence. The afternoon brought visitors, carefully screened and scheduled to avoid overwhelming Catherine but providing much-needed connection to the world beyond the hospital walls. The Queen sent her personal physician to consult with Catherine's medical team, along with a beautiful arrangement of spring flowers from the palace gardens and a handwritten note that brought tears to Catherine's eyes when she was alert enough to read it. James arrived with updates from the business world that suddenly seemed so much less important than it had just days ago. The Easter campaigns they had been planning, the new product launches scheduled for the spring season, the expansion plans that had seemed so urgent and exciting, all of it felt distant and trivial compared to the simple desire for Catherine to recover fully and return home to her family. "Everything's under control," he assured Carole during a quiet moment while Catherine rested. "The team knows exactly what to do, and honestly, most of the major decisions can wait until you're both ready to deal with them. The important thing right now is taking care of Catherine and taking care of yourself." Taking care of herself was something Carole had barely thought about since receiving that first devastating phone call. She had been running on adrenaline and determination, fueled by maternal instinct and the desperate need to be useful somehow. But, as the shock began to wear off and the immediate crisis seemed to be stabilizing, she found herself experiencing the delayed reaction that often comes after trauma. Her hands shook when she tried to drink her tea. Her appetite had disappeared completely, making even the thought of food feel impossible. Sleep remained elusive despite her exhaustion, her mind too active with worry and what-if scenarios to allow for true rest.
She found herself startling at sudden sounds, her nervous system on high alert even in the relative calm of Catherine's recovery. "You need to eat something," Michael said gently, appearing at her elbow with a sandwich from the hospital cafeteria. "Catherine needs you to stay strong, and you can't do that if you don't take care of yourself." The logic was sound, but putting it into practice felt almost impossible. How could she focus on her own needs when Catherine was lying in a hospital bed, still so fragile and vulnerable? How could she leave even for a few minutes when something might happen, when Catherine might need her? But, as the afternoon wore on and Catherine continued to show slow but steady improvement, Carole found herself beginning to believe that they might actually get through this crisis. The color was gradually returning to Catherine's cheeks, her voice was growing stronger with each conversation, and the medical team's assessments were becoming increasingly optimistic. "The 48-hour mark is always significant," the head nurse explained during her evening rounds. "We've passed that milestone now with no complications, which is very encouraging. Her body is responding well to the treatment, and all her indicators are moving in the right direction." That evening, as the hospital settled into its quiet nighttime routine, Catherine was alert enough for her longest conversation since the surgery. She wanted to know about everything she had missed, from the children's school activities to the latest family news to the business decisions that had been postponed in her absence. "I feel so guilty," she admitted, her voice still weak but filled with the familiar warmth that had always been her trademark. "Everyone's lives are being disrupted because of me. The children's routines are off, William's schedule has been completely rearranged, you and Dad are missing important meetings." "Stop," Carole said firmly, reaching for Catherine's hand and squeezing it gently. "Don't you dare feel guilty about getting sick. Don't you dare apologize for needing help. We're family, and this is what families do. We take care of each other." It was a conversation they had had before, in different circumstances but with the same underlying theme. Catherine had always carried more responsibility than she should have, always worried about the impact of her needs on others, always tried to minimize her own struggles to avoid burdening the people she loved. "When you were little," Carole continued, settling back in her chair for what she hoped would be a longer conversation, "you used to apologize for crying when you were hurt. Do you remember? You'd fall down and scrape your knee, and even while the tears were streaming down your face, you'd say sorry for being upset." Catherine smiled weakly. "I don't remember that." "Well, I do. And I told you then the same thing I'm telling you now. You never have to apologize for being human. You never have to apologize for needing help or comfort or care. That's not a burden, that's a privilege. It's a privilege to be able to help someone you love." The words seemed to resonate with Catherine, whose eyes filled with tears that spoke of relief and gratitude and the overwhelming emotions that come with facing one's own mortality. For a few moments, they simply sat together in comfortable silence, mother and daughter connected by bonds that had been forged 39 years ago and strengthened through decades of shared experiences. "I was so scared," Catherine finally whispered, the admission costing her visible effort. "When I woke up in the recovery room, I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. I just knew something was wrong, and all I could think about was the children and William and whether I would be able to get back to them." Carole felt her own eyes filling with tears. "You're going to get back to them. You're going to get back to all of us. This is just a detour, not a destination." It was a phrase she had used many times over the years when the children faced disappointments or setbacks, a reminder that temporary difficulties didn't define the overall journey of their lives. But saying it now, in this context, felt like both a promise and a prayer, a declaration of faith in Catherine's strength and in the power of love to overcome even the most frightening challenges. The second night was easier than the first, though sleep still came in fragments interrupted by the sounds of the hospital and the constant hum of monitoring equipment. But Catherine's breathing was steadier now, her color better, and the medical team's assessments continued to be encouraging. When dawn broke over London, filtering through the hospital windows with the promise of a new day, Carole felt something she hadn't experienced since this ordeal began: genuine hope. Not the desperate, bargaining kind of hope that had sustained her through the first terrible hours, but real, grounded optimism based on Catherine's visible improvement and the expertise of the medical professionals caring for her. Catherine was going to recover. She was going to go home to her children and her husband and her life of service and purpose. This terrifying chapter was going to end, and they were all going to be stronger for having lived through it together. But even as relief began to replace fear in Carole's heart, she knew that this experience had changed something fundamental in how she understood her role as a mother. Her children were adults now, with their own families and responsibilities and lives that she couldn't control or protect in the way she had when they were young. The illusion of safety that had gradually developed over the years, the sense that the worst of life's dangers had passed once her children reached adulthood, had been shattered completely. She was being forced to confront the reality that loving someone means accepting the constant possibility of loss, that being a parent means carrying a kind of vulnerability that never really goes away, no matter how old your children become. The third day dawned with unexpected complications that sent Carole's fragile sense of optimism crashing back into fear. Catherine had developed a fever during the night, her temperature climbing steadily despite the medical team's interventions. The calm, controlled atmosphere of the previous day was replaced by hushed consultations between doctors and an increase in monitoring that made everyone tense with renewed anxiety. "It's not uncommon after this type of surgery," the lead surgeon explained, but her expression was more serious than it had been since Catherine's initial recovery. "The body sometimes responds to the trauma with inflammation that can manifest as fever. We're treating it aggressively with antibiotics and monitoring her closely for any other signs of infection." Infection. The word hung in the air like a threat, bringing with it all the fears that Carole had thought they were moving past. She found herself back in the desperate bargaining mode that had characterized the first terrible night, making promises to whatever forces might be listening if they could just get past this new obstacle. Catherine herself seemed less aware of the gravity of the situation, the fever making her drowsy and confused in a way that was almost more frightening than her alert awareness of her condition had been. She drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes mumbling about the children or asking for William, sometimes becoming agitated about duties and responsibilities that existed only in her fever-influenced imagination. "She keeps asking about a state dinner," William told Carole during one of Catherine's restless periods. "She's convinced she's supposed to be somewhere, that she's letting someone down by being here. I keep telling her there's nothing on the schedule, but she doesn't seem to remember." The fever dreams revealed so much about what occupied Catherine's mind even in illness: her children, her responsibilities, her constant awareness of the many people counting on her to fulfill her role with grace and reliability. Even unconscious, she was worrying about others, trying to ensure that her absence didn't cause problems or disappointments. Carole found herself studying Catherine's face during these fevered moments, looking for signs of the little girl she remembered, the child who had been so determined to please everyone, to do everything perfectly, to never let anyone down. The weight of expectations that Catherine carried had grown exponentially over the years, but the fundamental drive to serve others had remained constant since childhood. The medical team worked with quiet efficiency throughout the morning, adjusting medications, ordering additional tests, consulting with specialists who appeared and disappeared like ships passing in the night. Carole tried to stay out of their way while remaining close enough to Catherine's bedside to provide whatever comfort her presence might offer, but the helplessness was almost overwhelming. "We should call the children," William said quietly during one particularly difficult moment when Catherine's temperature spiked higher than it had been. "Not to worry them, but they should know their mother is fighting hard to get better. Sometimes I think love can be a kind of medicine too." The video call was arranged with careful coordination between the hospital staff and the security team, ensuring privacy while allowing the children to see their mother despite her weakened condition. George, Charlotte, and Louis appeared on the screen with the boundless energy and innocent optimism that only children possess, their faces lighting up when they saw Catherine propped up in her hospital bed. "Mummy!" Charlotte exclaimed, pressing her face close to the camera. "Are you feeling better? We made you cards, and Louis drew you a rainbow because he says it means everything will be sunny again soon." Catherine's response was weak but filled with love, her fevered state making her more emotional than usual as she spoke to each child individually, asking about their activities and reassuring them that she would be home soon. Watching this interaction, Carole felt her heart breaking with the beauty and fragility of the moment, the way Catherine summoned strength she didn't have to comfort her children. "I love you all so much," Catherine whispered as the call ended, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. "I just want to hold them again. I want to be home for bedtime stories and school pickups and all the ordinary moments I've been taking for granted." The afternoon brought a gradual improvement in Catherine's condition, the fever beginning to respond to treatment and her consciousness becoming clearer and more focused. But the setback had taken its toll on everyone, serving as a stark reminder of how precarious recovery could be, how quickly hope could be transformed back into fear. Carole found herself thinking about all the times she had worried unnecessarily about her children over the years, all the minor illnesses and small accidents that had seemed catastrophic in the moment but had passed quickly with no lasting effects. She had often chided herself for being overly anxious, for seeing danger where none existed, for letting maternal protectiveness override common sense. But this experience was teaching her that sometimes the worst fears do come true. Sometimes the phone call in the middle of the night really is the one you've been dreading. Sometimes the ordinary day really can be the last ordinary day for a very long time. The challenge wasn't learning to worry less, but learning to live fully despite the knowledge that everything could change in an instant. "Do you remember," Catherine said during one of her more lucid moments, "when I was about 10 and I got food poisoning from that restaurant in Brighton? You sat up with me all night, holding my hair back and bringing me water and telling me stories to distract me from feeling sick?" Carole smiled at the memory. "You were so brave. You kept apologizing for ruining our holiday, even though you were completely miserable. And do you know what you said when you finally started feeling better?" Catherine shook her head weakly. "You said, 'Thank you for taking care of me, Mummy. I hope I can take care of you like that when you're old.' And I thought to myself, what an extraordinary child I have, thinking about giving back even when she's been through something difficult." "I meant it," Catherine whispered. "I still mean it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more medical professionals, but the moment stayed with Carole as she watched the team work with their quiet competence and genuine care. This was what families did for each other. They showed up, they stayed present, they provided whatever comfort and support they could offer, regardless of their own needs or fears. Evening brought another turning point, as Catherine's fever finally broke completely and her vital signs stabilized at levels that had the medical team cautiously optimistic once again. The crisis seemed to be passing, but the day had served as a powerful reminder of how much they still had to lose and how grateful they needed to be for every small improvement. "I think we can start talking about next steps," the lead surgeon said during her evening rounds. "If Catherine continues to improve at this rate, we might be able to discuss discharge planning in a few days. But we'll want to be very conservative, ensure she's completely stable before she leaves our care." Discharge planning. The phrase sounded like music to Carole's ears, the first concrete indication that this nightmare might actually have an end, that they might soon be able to return to something resembling normal life. But it also brought new anxieties about Catherine's care at home, about managing her recovery without the constant monitoring and immediate medical support that the hospital provided. "What will that look like?" William asked, voicing the concerns that Carole was feeling but hadn't yet articulated. "What kind of support will she need? What are the restrictions on her activities?" The surgeon's explanation was detailed and reassuring, outlining a recovery plan that would gradually return Catherine to full activities while ensuring proper healing and monitoring for any delayed complications. Physical therapy, follow-up appointments, medication management, activity restrictions, it would be a process, but it was a process with a clear endpoint and specific goals. That night, as the hospital settled into its quiet rhythm and Catherine slept more peacefully than she had since the surgery, Carole allowed herself to begin imagining the future again. Easter celebration with the family, summer holidays with the children, gradual return to public duties and royal responsibilities, the ordinary busyness of family life that she had never fully appreciated until it was threatened. She thought about the changes this experience would bring to all of them, the way surviving a health crisis together would deepen their bonds and reshape their priorities. Catherine would probably be even more focused on family time, more aware of the preciousness of ordinary moments, more determined to balance her public responsibilities with private joy. William would carry the memory of how close he came to losing the love of his life, how quickly stability could be shattered, how important it was to express love and gratitude regularly rather than assuming there would always be time later. The children would grow up with the knowledge that sometimes parents get sick but families take care of each other, that love means showing up even when things are scary or difficult. And Carole herself would never again take for granted the simple pleasure of a family dinner where everyone is healthy and present, never again minimize the importance of the small daily interactions that make up the fabric of a life well lived. This experience was teaching her that every day with her children and grandchildren was a gift, regardless of what challenges or difficulties it might contain. "I keep thinking about last Christmas," Catherine said suddenly, her voice clearer than it had been all day. "Do you remember how chaotic it was? Louis was overtired and crying, Charlotte was upset about her dress, George was anxious about the carol service, and I was stressed about everything being perfect?" Carole nodded, remembering the mixture of joy and exhaustion that had characterized that particular family gathering. "I was so focused on making everything run smoothly that I almost forgot to enjoy it," Catherine continued. "I kept thinking about all the things that could go wrong, all the ways we might disappoint people or fail to live up to expectations. But now, lying here, all I can remember is how beautiful Charlotte looked when she finally smiled, how proud George was when he sang his solo, how sweet Louis was when he fell asleep in William's arms during the service. That's what matters, Carole said softly.
That's what's always mattered.
Not the perfection, but the love. Not the flawless execution, but the genuine connection. It was a lesson they all needed to learn over and over again, the reminder that life's meaning came not from achievement or performance but from the quality of relationships and the depth of caring that existed between people who loved each other. This crisis was stripping away everything non-essential, revealing what truly mattered when everything else fell away. When I get out of here, Catherine said, her voice growing stronger with determination, I want to spend more time just being present with the children. Not managing their schedules or worrying about their development or thinking about what comes next, but just enjoying who they are right now, in this moment. That sounds like a wonderful plan, Carole replied, thinking about how this experience was changing all of their perspectives on what constituted a life well lived. As the third day drew to a close, Carole felt a fundamental shift in her understanding of what it meant to be a mother to adult children. She couldn't protect Catherine from illness or injury any more than she could control the weather or stop time from passing. But she could show up, she could provide comfort and support, she could be a steady presence during times of uncertainty and fear. And, perhaps most importantly, she could model the kind of resilience and grace that she hoped her children would carry into their own lives, the ability to face difficulties with courage and faith, to find meaning in struggle, and to emerge from crisis with deeper appreciation for the gifts that surrounded them every day. The fourth day brought the first genuine smile Carole had seen from Catherine since before the surgery, and with it came a flood of emotions that she had been holding back for days. Relief, gratitude, exhaustion, and overwhelming love all crashed together as she watched her daughter sit up in bed without assistance for the first time, her color finally returning to something approaching normal, her eyes bright with awareness and hope. I feel almost human again, Catherine said, her voice stronger than it had been since the crisis began. I actually feel hungry, which Dr. Peterson says is an excellent sign. And I managed to walk to the bathroom by myself this morning, though I won't be running any marathons anytime soon. The improvement was remarkable and swift once Catherine's body had turned the corner. Each hour seemed to bring new progress, small milestones that felt like enormous victories given how close they had come to losing everything. The medical team was cautiously optimistic but clearly pleased with her recovery, discussing discharge plans with increasing specificity and confidence. But, with the immediate crisis passing, Carole found herself experiencing a delayed emotional reaction that she hadn't anticipated. All the fear and anxiety she had been suppressing in order to stay strong for Catherine came flooding back, leaving her feeling shaky and overwhelmed in moments when she should have been celebrating. It's completely normal, a hospital's family counselor explained when Carole mentioned her unexpected emotional state. When we're in crisis mode, we often suppress our own needs and feelings to focus on what needs to be done. Once the immediate danger passes, all those emotions need somewhere to go. The explanation made sense intellectually, but it didn't make the experience any less disorienting. Carole found herself crying at unexpected moments when Catherine laughed at something William said, when a nurse made a kind comment about how brave Catherine had been, when she received a text from Louis asking if Mummy would be home in time to read him a bedtime story. I think I'm having a breakdown, she confessed to Michael during one of their brief walks through the hospital corridors. Just when everything is getting better, I'm falling apart. You're not falling apart, he said gently, taking her hand as they paused by a window overlooking the bustling London street below. You're processing. You're allowing yourself to feel everything you've been too scared to feel for the past few days. It's healthy, even if it doesn't feel comfortable. The hospital had become a strange kind of temporary home over the past few days, its rhythms and routines as familiar to Carole now as her own house. She knew which nurses worked which shifts, which cafeteria served the best tea, which elevator was fastest to Catherine's floor, which chairs in the family lounge were most comfortable for the long vigils that crisis demanded. But familiarity didn't make it any less surreal to think about how completely their lives had been disrupted by a single phone call. Less than a week ago, her biggest concern had been coordinating Easter dinner menu with Catherine and ensuring that all the grandchildren's dietary preferences were accommodated. Now she was learning medical terminology and monitoring vital signs and celebrating things like successful trips to the bathroom. Do you think this changes everything? Catherine asked during one of their longer conversations that afternoon. I mean, not just the practical things like when I can return to work, but the deeper things. How we think about life, what we prioritize, how we spend our time. It was a question Carole had been pondering herself, the sense that surviving something like this couldn't help but shift one's perspective on what mattered and what didn't. The business meetings that had seemed urgent a week ago now felt almost trivial. The social obligations that had filled their calendars looked different when viewed through the lens of life's fragility. "I think it clarifies things," Carole said thoughtfully. "It strips away the noise and helps you see what's really essential. But I don't think it has to change everything, just refine it. Make it more intentional." They talked about the small changes. Catherine was already planning: more family dinners without phones or distractions, regular date nights with William that couldn't be postponed for work obligations, dedicated one-on-one time with each child that was protected from other commitments. Simple things, but profound in their implications for how a life could be lived with greater presence and purpose. The afternoon brought a parade of visitors, each bringing their own form of support and connection to the world beyond the hospital walls. The Queen arrived with characteristic dignity and genuine warmth, spending time not just with Catherine but also with William and Carole, acknowledging the way this crisis had affected the entire family. "These experiences test us," she said quietly to Carole during a private moment. "They reveal what we're made of, but they also show us what we have to be grateful for. Catherine is fortunate to have a mother who would drop everything to be here, just as you are fortunate to have a daughter strong enough to fight her way back to health." The words carried extra weight coming from someone who had navigated decades of public responsibility while managing private family crises, who understood the unique challenges of maintaining personal relationships under constant scrutiny, who had learned to balance duty with love in ways that few people could truly comprehend. Pippa and James arrived together in the early evening, their presence bringing a different kind of energy, the easy familiarity of siblings who had grown up together, who shared memories and inside jokes that didn't need explanation, who could communicate comfort and support through simple presence rather than elaborate words or gestures. "Remember when we thought Catherine was being dramatic about that appendicitis when she was 16? Pippa said, settling into her usual chair beside Catherine's bed. "We kept telling her it was just a stomachache and she should stop complaining. And then, when we finally got her to the doctor. Emergency surgery within 2 hours," Catherine finished, laughing weakly at the memory. "I've never felt so vindicated about being a hypochondriac. Though I suppose I can't use that excuse anymore. Apparently I really do have a talent for medical emergencies." The siblings' easy banter filled the room with warmth and normalcy, reminding everyone present that Catherine was more than her public role, more than her titles and responsibilities. She was a sister who had shared countless ordinary moments of childhood and adolescence, who had been teased and loved and supported through all the normal challenges of growing up in a close family. "The children have been asking when they can visit," William reported, showing Catherine a video message they had recorded that afternoon. "George wants to know if hospitals allow visitors under 12, and Charlotte is convinced that if she brings enough flowers, it will make you better immediately." Watching Catherine's face light up as she viewed the children's messages, Carole was struck by how completely maternal love had transformed her daughter. The young woman who had once worried primarily about her own adventures and achievements had become someone whose entire world revolved around the welfare and happiness of 3 small people who depended on her completely. "Tomorrow," Catherine said firmly. "If the doctors clear it, I want them to visit tomorrow. I need to see them, to hold them, to prove to myself and to them that I'm really going to be okay." The medical team, consulted about the possibility of a children's visit, was supportive but cautious. Brief visits were fine as long as Catherine continued to improve, but they would need to be carefully managed to avoid overstimulation or fatigue. Arrangements were made for the following afternoon, with backup plans in case Catherine's condition took any unexpected turns. As evening approached and the hospital settled into its nighttime routine, Carole found herself looking back on the past 4 days with a mixture of exhaustion and profound gratitude. They had navigated the worst crisis their family had faced in years, had seen Catherine fight her way back from a frightening medical emergency, had learned things about strength and love and resilience that could only come through surviving something genuinely difficult together. "I want to thank you," Catherine said suddenly, reaching for Carole's hand with strength that had been absent just days ago. "Not just for being here, but for everything. For raising me to be strong enough to get through this. For showing me what it means to love someone completely, without conditions or reservations." Carole felt tears spring to her eyes again, but this time they were tears of completion rather than fear, of gratitude rather than desperation. "You don't need to thank me for loving you. That's not something I do for you, it's something I am because of you. Being your mother is the greatest privilege of my life." It was a conversation they had never quite had before, the explicit acknowledgement of how their relationship had shaped them both, how the bonds between parent and child continued to evolve and deepen throughout their lives. Crisis had stripped away the usual polite boundaries and allowed them to speak more directly about love and legacy and what really mattered. When I get out of here, Catherine continued, I want us to spend more time together. Not just family gatherings and celebrations, but regular time. Maybe we could start having lunch once a week, just the two of us. No agenda, no specific purpose, just being together. I would love that, Carole replied, thinking about how this experience had reminded her that time with loved ones was never guaranteed, that the opportunity to create memories and deepen relationships should never be taken for granted or postponed for more convenient moments. The fourth night was the most peaceful since the ordeal began, with Catherine sleeping soundly and, naturally for the first time since the surgery. Her breathing was easy and regular, her color healthy, her vital signs stable enough that the monitoring equipment had been reduced to basic levels. The crisis was truly over, and recovery was well underway. Carole finally allowed herself to sleep deeply that night, her body surrendering to the exhaustion that had been building for days but which she had been afraid to acknowledge while Catherine's condition remained uncertain. She dreamed of ordinary things, family dinners and birthday parties and lazy afternoons in the garden with the grandchildren, simple pleasures that had taken on profound meaning through the lens of almost losing them. When morning came, it brought the promise of Catherine's discharge within the next day or two, of returning home to Adelaide Cottage and resuming the rhythms of family life that had been so brutally interrupted. There would still be recovery ahead, weeks of reduced activity and careful monitoring, but the worst was over and the future was once again filled with possibilities rather than fears. You know what I'm most looking forward to? Catherine said over the breakfast that she was finally able to eat with genuine appetite. Making pancakes with the children on Sunday morning. Just standing in our kitchen, making a mess, listening to them chatter about their week. The most ordinary thing in the world, and it sounds like absolute heaven. Carole understood completely. After days of medical equipment and clinical environments and carefully monitored everything, the prospect of normal family chaos felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. The sound of children's laughter, the comfort of familiar spaces, the simple pleasure of being together without crisis or drama or fear, these were the things that made life worth living. As they prepared for Catherine's homecoming, Carole reflected on how this experience had changed her understanding of what it meant to be a family. They had always been close, had always supported each other through various challenges and celebrations, but this crisis had revealed new depths of love and commitment that she hadn't fully appreciated before. She thought about the young woman Catherine had been when she married William, confident and radiant but still learning how to balance her private desires with public responsibilities. The woman preparing to leave this hospital bed was different, more grounded, more aware of life's fragilities, more determined to protect and cherish the relationships that gave her life meaning. And Carole herself felt changed too, more conscious of her role not just as a mother but as a keeper of family bonds, a creator of memories, a guardian of the love that held them all together. The business empire she had built would continue to thrive, but it would never again be her primary definition of success. That honor belonged to the family she had raised, the relationships she had nurtured, the legacy of love that would outlast any professional achievement. The ordeal was ending, but its lessons would last a lifetime. They had been tested and had emerged stronger, more grateful, more aware of what truly mattered. As they prepared to return to the world beyond these hospital walls, Carole carried with her a renewed appreciation for the extraordinary gift of ordinary days spent with people she loved more than life itself.